starts. Oh, hot ziggity. Okay, so today's talk is called A Quick Trip Through Panopoly, and this part's going to be very old school. You're going to get like really ugly slides. So, you know, pretend it's 1995 and we'll move right on. So this is going to work kind of in the same format where I usually do these talks, and this is the second time I've done this talk, so I at least know the really stupid stuff I did the first time. This is going to be a little bit of sort of lecture, but please feel free to ask questions and interrupt me and tell me I'm wrong. And then we will stumble through kind of a live demo where we'll take a look at a Panopoly site and see some of what goes on in there. And then comes the third part where you will all ask a whole lot of questions I can't answer because I've done this before and I know how this works. So, who is this balding dude? Okay, so I run a small hosting and development company in Western Wisconsin, which I live on a farm in the middle of nowhere, which is blessed with having fiber to the farmhouse. It's just amazing. So we do high performance web hosting for CMS systems and custom packages. We do a lot of like Varnish and Cloudflare, and we know about Drupal development because we do it. So, you know, we do all that good stuff. We're an Acquia partner. We do web building in Drupal and domain sales and all that kind of good stuff. I am a political blogger in Wisconsin, which has been like really interesting over the last 6 or 7 years. And I'm president of our local food co-op, and I know this is totally not related, but I'm so proud. We just built a new store. For those of you who don't know, this is what a grocery store looks like 3 weeks before it opens, which was a little unnerving. And this is what it looks like after it opens, at least from the outside. So we just spent $5 million on a new store, so we have to peddle a lot of groceries to pay for it. Okay, so much for all the self-promotion. We'll move ahead. What is a Drupal distribution? So let me kind of take the temperature of the audience here. How many of you work in Drupal? Yeah, okay, that's about what I figured. How many of you have worked with Panopoly? Okay. This is going to be pretty introductory, so if you have worked with Panopoly, you may not see a lot that's new, just to warn you. If you want to go and see a different session, I am not going to be offended. So Drupal distributions are Drupal core with a collection of modules and themes, content sometimes, different kinds of setups and glue between things. And the general idea is that, you know, you're not faced with that empty, you have no content thing when you start up Drupal, which is one of the things that typically scares people off from Drupal right off the bat. And so the idea here is to build a fuller out-of-box experience and to give you a starting point. This can be really useful if you have a particular use case, and a lot of distributions are oriented toward very specific use cases. Makes it easier to build new sites and can sometimes make it easier to build other distributions, and we'll talk about that later. These things can be really helpful, but sometimes my experience with distributions has been really mixed. I kind of hate most of them. Most of them make a lot of assumptions that you really want to do things the way that developer wanted to do them, and your use case is exactly the same, and every time you try to do something different, you have to fight that. So, it's sometimes a problem. One example of that is the, at least Drupal 6 version of the conference organizing distribution. I did some of the organizing for Drupal Camp Wisconsin, in the last few years, and we started out trying to, well, for a couple of years, we did use the conference organizing distribution. And at one point, those of us who were working on the site just stared at each other and said, let's just start over and rebuild it from scratch, because that was so much easier, because we don't do things the way DrupalCon does, because, you know, it's like a much smaller conference and much more straightforward. So sometimes battling the distribution is more trouble than starting from scratch. A lot of them are way too ambitious and get in your way. One of the things I like about Panopoly is I think it brings just enough to the table so that it's actually worth using, and we tend to use Panopoly on 3/4 of our sites, I'd say now, just because it gives us a bunch of tools. The modularity is pretty clean. You can disable a lot of things if you don't want to use them. And it doesn't tend to break things furiously. So Panopoly is basically a whole lot of Drupal modules along with a bunch of upgraded views and some example content that you don't have to load. But if you haven't used it before, loading some of that stuff is helpful to figure out what's going on. It provides a lot of functionality out of the box. It's very panels oriented. It uses Panelizer very heavily, and we'll take a look at that later. And there's a lot of what I guess you can refer to as panels magic, and it's actually called Panopoly magic in the distribution, which gives you a lot of nice little things, mostly revolving around panels. It does have a pretty nice WYSIWYG environment that just kind of works out of the box and does most of what people expect. And I know some developers really hate putting WYSIWYG on your website, but I don't remember ever doing a site for a client where they didn't want it. So, and I think, you know, if you set up a bunch of sites and done WYSIWYG up from scratch, you know how painful that can be. It gives you a lot of help with responsive design, particularly for panels and images, and has a lot of places where you can do pages and work on them in place instead of going through kind of the traditional Drupal workflow. It also has some really nice administrative improvements using panels and views and some modules. Has responsive panels layouts that you can use. That's a big win. It has some apps. They do have an app server, but they're really minimal apps. And frankly, I never use them, and most people don't. I think they're there mostly to give you an idea of if you wanted to write apps and put them into Panopoly. These are some examples. That there's a Panopoly FAQ app, which builds facts in panels, but it's not very fancy. There are also some custom modules that act more or less as glue between the different contrib modules, and that's kind of one of the more powerful things. So you would probably want Panopoly for a couple of different reasons. It gives you a nice head start on building sites, you know, all that junk that where you install a million modules when you start out to try to get something useful. Some really useful page building stuff. Media integration's actually pretty good in it. It's a really good base for building your own distribution, and I think that's really what the developers have in mind, is to give you a way to build your own distribution. Like we have one of our own, which is built on Panopoly, but includes some of the other modules and things that we typically use. This works really well. So if you're interested in building your own distribution, this would be a good starting place. And there are a lot of tools in place for that. It can save you a whole lot of hours of the pointing and clicking and installing modules and configuring things, because you have a reasonable base for a site right from the start. So this includes panels, nice WYSIWYG, reusability of items. So that's kind of nice. You can put in, you can build panels throughout the site and then say, I want to be able to reuse that. And then you can just drop those panels in someplace else later. That's like really helpful sometimes. Everything's intended to be responsive. Some of that's a little more successful in some places than others, but it gets better with every release. A lot of in-page layout, so it uses PaneltyPE, so you can take one of your pages and drag and drop things around, and we'll look at that too. Has media system built in and lots of nice integration between all of the above. And now we'll talk about some of the reasons why you might not want Panopoly, or why you might find it annoying. If you are not a panels person, I would not go down this road. It really kind of assumes that you're going to use panels and you're going to understand them and you're going to use them pretty heavily. Strictly speaking, you don't need to use panels, but I don't see the point if you don't, unless it was just to, have the WYSIWYG and media. It's very heavily tied to TinyMCE right now. A lot of the integration works really well with TinyMCE, and if you're going to change something else, you might find it's more work than you wanted to do. This is also a thing that's in flux, and we'll discuss that later. You better be used to using features, or you're going to find life trying. You're particularly going to find doing upgrades between versions trying. It doesn't mean you got to be a big features guru, but you do need to be able to deal with it, or you will fail, I can guarantee it. Some of this could be better documented. Well, all of it could be better documented. And that's part of the reason why I started doing this. I'm actually friends with a couple of the Panopoly developers, and I've been kind of trying to do talks around the country about Panopoly and kind of show it off to people, because it could be better documented. We've been talking about maybe writing a Panopoly book, which I don't know when any of us will find time to do that, but it would be a good idea. And so there are 2 Panopoly talks. Dave Snowpack gives them at a lot of Drupal camps, and I'm now working on this one. His is very oriented toward how do I write code for Panopoly, and mine's much more oriented toward site builders, so it's real different. And Dave sat through the first time I gave this talk, which was really unnerving to me, but it actually worked out okay. It's only one possible strategy. It may not fit your use case. You need to weigh whether that pile of great features is worth the small amount of fighting with it you might do, but I think this is, out of all the distributions I've worked with, the only one that doesn't make me nuts. You need to be careful about upgrades because it's very heavily dependent on features. So you need to understand how to use features override. It's really not that hard, but it's really disturbing if you go in and do an upgrade to a newer version and then find that, the customizations you did disappear. Or conversely, you do the upgrade and you find that you don't get the new functionality working that was in the upgrade. They tend to do sometimes upgrades to views and things like that, which you might break. You shouldn't, and this is true of almost all distributions, you really should try not to upgrade individual modules that are part of the distribution. Some of those modules are patched. Some of them you will find if you just go in and willy-nilly upgrade the one of the modules that's in there, you'll find you're going to break the site because the new version doesn't really work with anything else because it's all tied together. They do a great job of updating for security issues, so that's like actually pretty good. Usually, like if there's a Drupal core security issue or a security issue with one of the modules, you'll find there will be a new Panopoly distribution real soon. I did break this rule really seriously when we had the Drupal-geddon problem because you really couldn't wait. So we did slap some patches in there. on Panopoly distributions, but otherwise you're usually fine. It's more or less like a normal Drupal version upgrade. You know, everything works the same. You can do it in Drush. You can just pretend it's Drupal. But you do want to revert all your features after you do the upgrade so that you get the new functionality from whatever views there are. And usually the release notes will tell you if they've changed any of the stuff that requires reverting the features. Does everybody understand that? That, you know, okay. There are a bunch of other distributions that are based on Panopoly because, you know, that's one of the things they wrote it for. The biggest one is Open Atrium, which, if any of you have used Open Atrium, it's like Panopoly with a whole lot of other stuff added to it. It's really intended for like portal sites that have a lot of different, what they refer to as spaces, or what you might think of as organic groups, because it is organic groups. It's just using a little different terminology. It's really nice if you're running a big, complicated portal site. We're developing one of those right now on it, but it's one of those things we're doing for ourselves, so it's always on the back burner. So it gives you discussions, there's document handling, there's events, you can have workflow in it, which is kind of nice. Notifications, activity streams, it has all that stuff in it. And you can use it as an intranet or extranet site, and I'm not going to say anything more about it, but it's worth looking at if you're building that kind of site. There are some other ones, Open Academy, which is intended for schools, Open Church, which, you know, oddly enough is for churches building websites. There's a restaurant distribution, which is actually kind of nice if you have to build a website for a restaurant. It's got a lot of the stuff you'd want, you know, menus and all that stuff. It's just in there. Web Experience Toolkit's really interesting. It integrates Panopoly with a lot of features from the Spark project. So it has a bunch of in-place editing and cool stuff like that. Some of that stuff's not real stable, so you know, you may find some things don't quite work the way you expect, but it's really cool and shows you a lot of the future of Drupal, I think, especially after it comes out and gets settled. And you can try all these things out at simplytest.me if you want. They're all in there, and that's an easy way to just try it without investing a lot of time. Okay, I'm actually pretty much on schedule. That's amazing. So pretend that you run a small web hosting and development company in Western Wisconsin, and for various reasons you're thinking, I really want to separate those two functions. I really want to rebrand the hosting, and I want to call it cmsfarm.com, which is like appropriate for a lot of reasons because like it's based on a farm. And we'll be looking at some sample content and other things to try to demonstrate some of the Panopoly features. So I'm going to step you through some of this stuff on an actual website. We'll see how this goes. Okay. This is the really ugly version of the site. I'm actually doing this for a reason, because it's easier to see some of the Panopoly functionality on something that isn't nicely themed. So right at the moment, this is running responsive Bardic as a base theme. It just has some really simple content types, but they're set up, I think, to show you a little bit of what you can do. So let's go to the home page. Okay, so this is pretty straightforward right now. It's got a little slider at the top, and that's running Flex Slider. It's just showing the different hosting packages we do, including the brand new one, the It Special, which is a shared hosting package for Drupal 8, which we have to keep changing because Drupal 8 won't stand still. So under that, we just got some typical stuff, you know. got a little map here that shows where I live. This is really interesting because if you give Google my address, it thinks it's 6 miles away from where I live. But if you look for my company, it knows where that is. So, and just things like, you know, Drupal Association membership, some video, and that kind of stuff on the front page. So let's take a little look at a few of these things. You know, so it has all these links built in. So as an admin, I can just go in and say, I want to edit this. It's also a new mouse, so it doesn't quite work the way I'm used to. This is what I'm calling a magic text block, and it's there only to kind of demonstrate one of the features here, which is that it will let you build content on the fly and, you know, say I want to put in an image, I want to put in a text block, I want to put in a video, and then if you go in and you tell it you want to make it reusable, I can just say it's reusable and put it into a category of content and an administrative title, and then I can reuse this block other places. So that's a really lame example. This little badge is the same. One of the things you can insert is a map, and that's like really straightforward. You'll note the map, the address is Kruskin Consulting LLC, Menominee, Wisconsin, because if I put in the address, it puts it in the wrong place. But this is just, you know, typical Google geolocation lookup. You can put in an address and it will find it, usually. You can put in a little bit of information. It's got a WYSIWYG editor. And you can make it reusable and put it in different kinds of content and do access control and, you know, all the typical stuff. Let's take a little look at the WYSIWYG editor. This is, yes, certainly. Yeah. It's one of the things they provide. Yeah, you can just say, I want to drop a map here, and it'll do it. And of course, you can, you know, do maps however you want, but this is what's wired in. So you got, you know, kind of, you know, you can change the buttons however you want. It uses the WYSIWYG module, and you can go in and have, you know, different kinds of WYSIWYG and different kinds of text format filtering. One of the things they do integrate in here that's kind of nice is this kitchen sink plugin, because you really often have, you know how it is. You have two classes of users, the ones you don't want to confuse and the ones who you want to use all the formatting features, including the ones you really don't want them to use. So you can set up the buttons and then put some of them in here with the kitchen sink, and you click on this widget, and then you get the other really ugly things like changing formatting and colors and the more advanced functionality. So we use that a lot. Okay. Let me go back and see what I tried to remind myself to do. So it uses PaneltyPE, which will be a lot more visible if I had that. Yeah, how many of you have ever used that? It's part of the panels package. So you can go in and customize a page. So, and I've probably broken some of this because, like, I was showing it to my daughter last night. And so we have this Richard Thompson video on here, which makes no sense whatsoever, but I really like Richard Thompson. And so say I want to move that up. I can just drop it up there, and it'll move up in that section and save it. And now Richard's more important. And the videos are, well, let's take a look. Let's build a video. Let's do some stuff. You can also change the layout. So these are all responsive layouts that you have, and you can go in and make a subset of those layouts available for different kinds of content, which is like really handy because otherwise people do really lame stuff. But these are all fully responsive and pretty well behaved. So, you know, you could go in and say, well, I want that. And then you can take your various pieces of content and move them into whichever pane you want them to show up in. We're not going to do that because, you know, I'll really mess that up somehow. But you can do that, move them around, save it, and life is good. And one of the nice things in Panopoly is, say you have a content type, say you have a blog content type, and you can say, well, this is the default layout, this is what goes in by default, these are the fields, they go here, they go there. But you can go change that on an individual page. You could have one blog page where the layout's different from all the other ones if you give people permission to do that. I'm going through that with a client right now where the site is run by a bunch of different people, and they each have their little fiefdom within the nonprofit. And one of them wants his pages to be completely different from everybody else's, which is making their webmaster nuts, but she has succumbed. So that's actually kind of nice because it gives us a way for them to do that. So let's see. Let's take a little look at how that works. So it's very heavily built on Panelizer. And Panelizer is this kind of neat thing where you can take, you know, by default, your content types and everything work just like they normally do in Drupal, but you can override that. So let's take a look here. Blog entries. You can do a bunch of different kinds of overrides. You can panelize anything you want, including, you know, the user pages and any kind of entity that's in the site. And you can go in and override that and panelize it. So here we're taking the full page view of the blog entries. We're panelizing them. We're giving them a default panel where there's a default layout and a default way places go, and you have all the, you know, settings and adding CSS classes, and you can disable the Drupal blocks, which we usually do. You can set context, which is really nice, so you can have, you know, pull the context in from any number of things and have the page change from that. So like we typically do landing pages for the different departments in a nonprofit, and then you pass in which department it is and you get different pages, even though they're all built on the same panel. And context can get really confusing and complicated. You can change the layout. So this would change the default layout for the blog entry. And they have all these names. And again, I pulled this up somehow. Okay, and so the usual interesting thing is content, where you take your layout and put different things in the different panes. And the wireless in here is really erratic. So on the blog entries, we're building a special layout of them. We're taking widget for content maxing taxonomy ID, which is sort of like categorization for the content. We're taking in an image. There's an image field in the blog, and there's taxonomy term associated with it. And so we're displaying these two things over in the sidebar and the main content on the right-hand side. So it's sort of like the same kind of thing you'd probably do with blocks, but we're doing it in panels. You can also change the breadcrumbs and customize those in various different ways. You have a whole bunch of tokens you can substitute in. So here we're building a default, and you can say, you can allow people to build their own panels for a particular piece of content. So if you turn that on, then they can change the panels, but we're, in this case, leaving it off. So there's a fixed panel layout for that content type. Another cool thing you can do is change the allowed content. So kind of by default, you know, you can pull in anything in the whole world to a page. A lot of times you don't want that. It'll make people crazy. There's too many choices. You can go in and change all of that. So you can say, you know, if we build new versions of things, new blocks, new tokens, new menus, they're allowed, or I can say, you know, just the ones that were here, and set all kinds of things, which tokens you're allowed to use on this content. So the cool thing is, you know, you start out with something really useful out of the box, but now you've got a million things you can customize. Which view panes you're allowed to use, and you can go change all of that. So it's really flexible, and it does let you build sites that can act in a lot of different ways. And so let's take a look. So this is the kind of teaser version of a blog entry. But now if we go in and we look at it as a full entry, you see that the image is moved over there and it's a different size, and we put in the hosting plans over here, and that was all set up in the Panelizer. But you know, when you edit it, it's pretty typical Drupal-y editing form. It's integrated pretty tightly in with the media module, so you can go in and change that pretty neatly. Put in any kind of content that is supported in the media module, so you can, you know, stick in a YouTube video or whatever, and have a library of images and go pick out images later. It's got all that neat stuff. And you can go into Panelizer from a tab. Let's see, what else did I have here? Oh yes, so it's responsive. I'm not quite sure what the slider is going to do because I didn't really quite build that the way I wanted to. But so you'll see, you know, if you're on a cell phone or something narrower, now it's all collapsed into a different form. You have a fair amount of control over that, especially depending on which modules you load. I think we have full screen tablet and mobile formats in here, but that's all kind of got all the stuff you'd probably want, except it's the real typical out of the box image handling where, you know, you shoot down the whole image and it gets scaled. So if you're on a mobile phone, you're going to send down the full-sized image even though you really don't want to. So if you add in the picture module, or there are some other upcoming things too, but picture is what we usually use, then you can also pre-scale them before you send them down to the device, which can save you a lot of bandwidth. Oh, stylizer. That's never where I think it's going to be. So you can write your own styles for things. Stylizer is actually kind of neat, but sometimes it's a little painful because if you're working with a theme, you can get into kind of odd CSS fights over what overrides what if you're not careful. So kind of use it with a little bit of caution. So I have a style called hosting plan, which is what's used in the hosting plans on that front page slider. And you can go in and change the style of that particular hunk of content and override it. So there's an example up here of what it looks like. You can change coloring, change the fonts, which I'm just using the defaults here, but you can put in borders and change the padding and font families and all kinds of cool stuff like that. It's actually kind of handy if you got hunks of content in the site that you want to have styled in a particular way. However, there's always that point where you find out, well, and I really want to override something that Stylizer can't do, so you got to go in and change CSS anyway. So the video, works pretty much the way you want and builds the right size properly. This is a little video about using Cloudflare, which we're doing a lot of these days. I think I've covered most of those. So I think that's all I wanted to show you today. So now comes the part where you ask me the questions I can't answer. Are there any? Yeah.
What are some of the key editors using Panopoly instead of doing your own tool like using the module?
Well, I think pretty much what I said. I think the advantages are you get a bunch of modules that are already put in and pretty well integrated and a lot of controls over that. Like there's a Panopoly tab here. You get a bunch of responsive layouts built in. You have a lot of modules that are already in and integrated. You have WYSIWYG. You have a bunch of that stuff right out of the box. I mean, all pretty much just works. Live previews of things, which you can turn on or off. So while you're going in and changing a panel page, you can see what's happening immediately, or see previews of themes and how they'll look on the site. You can turn a lot of things on and off there. It's pretty powerful, and I think, like I said, I think particularly if you're interested in building your own distributions, it's a really good starting package. So I think, it suits some people and it doesn't suit others. It's kind of more a matter of style. But I find, starting out on a site, it can save me a day of work. Anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah, the magic content are those in.
Yeah.
No,
They're fieldable. Yeah, it's okay. Let's take a better look at something here. Okay, we'll look at a real simple example. So this is a node. Blogs are a node. In here, you can, let's say I wanted to add something in into this area. So you've got lots of things you can put in, and you can organize these by, whatever criteria you want. Let's get the right slide right here. So we got a lot of things that are, traditional blocks, which you can drop in on a page or a content type. Comment stuff.
Yeah, it was more the stuff that if you scroll down where that file and under that,
Right. Down here.
those are the magic, I assume, those are the magic blocks, and those are just exist.
Yeah, they just exist. It's fieldable panel entities module. So basically you can just go in and create stuff on the fly. Let's see, let's add a video.
So each of these is make it read.
Yeah.
So, it stores it as an entity that
Right.
can be hooked in.
Right.
And funded.
Yeah. So I don't have all of the goodies turned on here, but yeah, so you can, like if you wanted to add a YouTube video, you can just put in the URL here for it, and it'll build an embed and do all that stuff properly and make it the right size for where it goes. And you can say you want to make it reusable and then use it someplace else. And the same with all of the other stuff. So if we wanted to add in, oh man, I've been spending the last couple of days helping my daughters buy computers and installing software on them. And so it's like, Techno Dad. It's been trying. So like you want to add a map. No idea what's going to happen. And it builds an automatic preview, and there we are. Oh, amazing. And I could say make this reusable. Yeah, right. It'll show up under whatever we want to make it. And so it'll show up as Nerd Summit map. Page. Yeah, absolutely. It's not like blocks, they're panels. Probably not likely to do that, but you certainly can. Yeah. Save that. And there it is. And it's a regular Google map, so. I guess I should also say there are some changes afoot because, Drupal 8's imminent. And so there is a plan underway to port this to Drupal 8. And partly because of that, development on the Drupal 7 version is sort of on hold. It's mostly turning into things like security fixes and bug fixes, but not a lot of new stuff because they're trying to get forward to doing Drupal 8. One of the changes there will be it won't be using TinyMCE anymore because TinyMCE is not the default. And if we have a default editor in Drupal 8, it would be nice to use that instead. And of course, you know, all the other Drupal 8 goodness, which will allow all kinds of interesting things to exploit. But I expect it'll, at heart, look a lot like it does now. Anything else? Yes? Mm-hmm.
Be very careful if you keep upgrading Panopoly. I took over a thing that was Panopoly, and at some point they just decided to switch over to the more Drupal upgrade, and I had to go back to Panopoly.
Oh, Lord.
And it was easy just to rebuild it like that. There was a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure that probably made a lot of stuff ugly, especially if it went on very long.
Yeah, I think somebody did like a brush upgrade, and was like, oh, it's just brush upgrade Drupal.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, it's not rocket science, but it is a little more complicated, but it isn't any more complicated than if you had built it by hand and were doing code management on it, and you know, you face the same issues, right? One of the things I'm just incredibly looking forward to in Drupal 8 is real config management, because features is, you know, it's awful. Let's face it, it's just awful. You're using a tool that was intended for something completely different, and trying to make it work for config management, and it's just ugly. So I think, you know, now that we're going to actually have a framework for that, and any developer who doesn't support that in their modules and such will be a really bad actor. So I think life will, from that regard, be much simpler. And frankly, features just makes me crazy, because, you know, it's always doing stuff that's like, what the, at least with me, that happens a lot. So having something more clear cut will be much nicer. And I'm sure it will make maintaining Panopoly much easier too, because it won't be this, you know, package on the side. It'll actually be part of Drupal. Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you all for coming. I'm going to be around today and tomorrow. So I think I got some, assuming I actually got it in here. Yes. This is me. This is my company. If you want to get in touch later, please do. I'll be around today and tomorrow. I can't stay Sunday because we're trying to buy my daughter a new car on top of everything else. So, this was a surprise. I'm like, we're buying a car. Oh, the computer wasn't enough, huh? Okay. So yeah, life's busy. Yeah, and if you have hosting questions, you know, not just my hosting, but hosting questions in general, that is kind of my bailiwick in life. So hosting's performance, that sort of thing. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Now let's see if I can actually make this stop.